Hello, this is Ashutosh Varshney, and I'm speaking to you about my latest column in ThePrint. And the topic is the assassination of Charlie Kirk on 10th September in Utah at a university, Utah Valley University. Kirk was only 31 years old, and he had become one of the most important figures in the Make America Great Again movement, the so-called MAGA movement or MAGA movement, and had become a key conservative voice in the Republican Party. So who was Charlie Kirk? How did he become so important? And what are the larger issues that the assassination raises? These are the three questions that the column deals with. So Kirk was an avid supporter of President Donald Trump right since 2016-2017. And after he returned to power earlier this year in January, Kirk's advice was often sought by the administration, even though he had no formal position in the Trump government. And after Kirk's assassination, Trump issued an order that the flag of the United States shall be flown at half staff or half mast, as we say it in India, in all federal buildings and in all military posts, both in the United States and abroad. So how did he become so important? This is the second question that I posed, and let me answer it. In 2012, as a mere 18-year-old, Kirk dropped out of college and founded an organization called Turning Point USA. Its primary function was to create a conservative base in America's colleges. Kirk's argument was that colleges had become a fortress of left liberal ideology, and Generation Z, meaning people born between 1996 and 2010, were brainwashed by their professors and were plunging headlong into a left liberal swamp. To change that, Turning Point USA would sponsor Kirk's speaking tours in colleges where he would debate liberal college students, challenge them and answer them, demonstrating to them the emptiness of their positions and displaying the worth of conservatism. And hundreds of such chapters were opened in colleges, and Trump and Turning Point USA became a very important organization on college campuses. Now, as his influence grew, Kirk's positions became more and more right-wing, including belief in the Christian roots of America and the Christian roots also of American Constitution, endorsement of the traditional family structure, with women viewed primarily as mothers and daughters and not as professionals, and opposition to non-white immigration, opposition to abortion, opposition to gun control, opposition to gay marriages and transgender rights. And he also argued that America's cities, Democratic Party-led cities, had become dangerous places where the forces of crime and disorder were flourishing under Democratic sponsorship. Now, these are also the positions of the MAGA movement, which has viewed colleges and universities as America's preeminent institutions, teaching non-American values, they say, corrupting the morals of younger Americans, they say, and sapping thereby the strength of America as a nation. So why is Kirk's assassination leading to such remarkable coverage and what might be called soul searching in many, if not all, circles of American polity and society. The key issue is whether violence should be allowed to settle ideological difference, should be or can be allowed to settle ideological differences, for which there are some standard institutions in a democracy: the ballot box, the legislatures, and the courts. But America does have some specific features, the American democracy, some very unique features. The First Amendment of America's Constitution, for example, has a nearly absolute commitment to free speech. Exceedingly inflammatory things can be said about people and communities, which in many societies actually would be banned, including India. But America's First Amendment, First Constitutional Amendment, protects such speech. In other words, Americans have a constitutional right to be harsh and denigrating if they honestly feel that way. While the First Amendment allows such hurtful and disparaging speech on grounds of freedom of expression, the Second Amendment makes gun owning legally easier than in almost any democracy of the world, and perhaps in almost any society of the world. Legally owning. We're not talking about the illegal gun markets, but legal entitlement to gun ownership. And the two together, the First Amendment about free speech and the Second Amendment about gun ownership, together can explode at certain junctures of politics and history, as they have. Guns have been used to try to settle differences whenever high passions got attached to such differences. Historically, America, of course, is no stranger to violence. Perhaps the most violent period of US history, if we leave out the US Civil War, 1861 to 65, the most violent period of US history was in the so-called Jim Crow era, especially 1880 to 1910, when legally enforced racial segregation and vigilante violence, especially lynchings, produced Black subordination and white supremacy in the American South, not in the North, but in the American South. But the current phase of violence is different. It is political violence aimed at those who exercise power, either via appointments or elected positions, or via influence over millions through movements. In the last 10 years, there have been mob attacks on legislatures, including the January 6, 2021 attack on US Congress, Federal Congress, attempts to assassinate a presidential candidate, Mr. Trump, a Supreme Court justice, a congressman, arson attack on Pennsylvania governor's mansion, a militia's attempt to kidnap the Michigan governor, a violent entry into the home of the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, followed by an attack on her husband, Paul Pelosi. Both Democrats and Republicans have been targeted in such politically motivated violence. The decade of the 1960s is increasingly coming to the minds of scholars and observers. 4 major political figures were assassinated at that time. President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Robert F. Kennedy, who was also running for president in 1968, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King Jr. The 1960s were also called a polarized decade. Racial issues concerning the fight for racial equality and the Vietnam War were dividing Americans. But most observers also believe that the degree of polarization today is much, much greater. The political elite is so divided, so deeply divided, that bridges may be much harder to construct. Is the Kirk assassination an attack on the right by what President Trump repeatedly calls the lunatic radical left, which he says must be crushed using governmental power? Or is it something larger and bigger? The words of Spencer Cox, the governor of the state of Utah, where the assassination took place, are worthy of attention, at least some of his words. Kirk's assassination, said Spencer Cox, is much bigger than an attack on an individual. And I quote now at length, it is an attack on the American experiment. It is an attack on our ideals. We can return violence with violence. We can return hate with hate. And that is the problem with political violence. At some point, we have to find an off-ramp, or it is going to get much worse. History will dictate if this is a turning point for our country. To my young friends out there, you are inheriting a country where politics feels like rage, but we can choose a different path if we want to. Every single one of us gets to choose right now. Unquote. A Cox-like approach, if followed, can save America from collapsing deeper and deeper into a violent quagmire. Will America go for an off-ramp or seek to crush political opponents? The former can lead to peace, and the latter will almost certainly aggravate the problem and lead to greater violence. I will see you in 2 weeks again. Thank you.